Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you enjoy the show and you want to make sure that I can keep bringing you more episodes like this, more discussions with interesting people in the Japan world, then hey, consider becoming a patron. So over at japankyo.com/Patreon, you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. If you sign up for the $3 a month tier, you're going to get access to my Patreon exclusive podcast, Japanese Plus Alpha. It's focused on the Japanese language, and I do a bunch of research to talk about little things that interest me. So the latest episode just came out a few days ago, and it's all about expressions that feature the word for the color red in Japanese. And there's also a mention of a red tractor. If you want to find out what that's all about, then you got to listen to the latest episode. All right. So again, japankyo.com/Patreon. That's an immense help. Thank you so much to all you wonderful patrons who have already signed up. And if you can afford to do so, then hey, why not check it out? Welcome to Japan Station. I'm your host, Tony Vega. Just a quick announcement here at the top of the show. I released a new t-shirt design over at kimitodesigns.com. That's KIMITO designs.com. The t-shirt design is inspired by the latest episode of my other podcast, Ichimon Japan. That's episode 35. And in that episode, we talk about Japanese names for animals that have the word kuma in it, and kuma means bear. But these animals are not, according to scientific classification, actually bears. It's a very specific topic, I know, but there's a lot of really, really interesting information there. And the design is inspired by the tree climbing bag bear. So if you want to find out what a tree climbing bag bear is, go check out the t-shirt at kimitodesigns.com or go listen to the podcast. It's a pretty fun one. The t-shirt costs $19.99 plus shipping. There's 3 colors. And every purchase you make at kimitodesigns.com is going to support the show and everything I'm doing here with japankyo.com and Ichimon Japan and Japan Station. So if you want a new t-shirt and you want to make sure that I can keep doing this thing that I'm doing here, then hey, why not get a t-shirt? We both win, all right? So kimitodesigns.com, more t-shirt designs coming in the very near future as well. My guest today is someone who you no doubt are familiar with if you've been listening to Japan-focused podcasts for any significant amount of time. He is the man behind the Just Japan podcast, and he's done a whole bunch of other stuff on YouTube as well as several other podcasts. But like I said, I think many of you will know him from the Just Japan podcast, which has over 200 episodes out, interviews, and all kinds of interesting discussions over there. Kevin is not currently releasing new episodes of Just Japan, but you never know, he might start it back up again. For the time being, he is actually working on a different podcast called Munzee Maniacs, and Munzee is this mobile game that is actually kind of like a real life treasure hunt. It's kind of like geocaching, and it sounds really interesting, and we are going to talk about that towards the end of the conversation. But the bulk of today's conversation is actually about what happened to Kevin in 2020. So Kevin left Japan after living in Kobe for a very long time. He went to China to work and teach there. And unfortunately, around the end of 2019, well, you know, the whole coronavirus thing started happening in China. And that set off a chain of events that would lead Kevin to go back to Japan and a whole bunch of other stuff, which it's just a very, very interesting and I think pretty unique story. I mean, most of us did not have to deal with anything like what Kevin did. And I know some people had to deal with far worse situations, but nevertheless, I think Kevin's story is really, really interesting and really, I think, at least for me, for example, really made me feel grateful that my 2020 was wholly uneventful. It was a lot of staying home. And Kevin had to deal with a whole bunch of other problems, but he made it through totally fine. Him and his wife and his children are totally fine. And they definitely learned something in the process, I'm sure. But if anybody could have made it through this, I think it's Kevin, because he's just such a super nice and positive guy. So anyway, I won't keep going on and on because Kevin is going to tell you the story. So let's get to it. Here is my conversation with podcaster, educator, and all-around super nice Canadian guy, Kevin O'Shea.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
So let's start with Kobe. Since I mean, I know, like, I actually went back and listened to a few episodes of the Just Japan podcast, and I had listened to it quite a while ago, like when maybe around the time you first started, because I remembered hearing some of these. It just had been quite a number of years since I had listened to them. But for example, one, you were talking about how you were a PR ambassador for Kobe for a while, right?
Yeah, I did that for a year.
Yeah. So, I mean, when did you arrive in Kobe?
I arrived in Kobe in April 2008.
Okay.
And I was there until August 2017. So 9 years, basically.
And when was it that you started living on Port Island?
Right away. I lived on Port Island in Kobe my entire 9 years in Kobe. That's where I was. So what happened was I was living in Canada and I was just finishing up my Bachelor of Education degree. I returned to school actually at the age of 30, and I got my B.Ed and my teaching license to teach elementary school. And my wife is from Osaka, and she had a job in Osaka. And my initial job in Japan was in Akashi, so we just chose like halfway, like Kobe.
Right.
It just made the commute it just kind of made sense for both of us. And yeah, she found an apartment on Port Island, and the rent wasn't too bad. It was a lot cheaper than Roko Island or other parts of Kobe.
Yeah.
So me just finishing some time in university, I didn't have a lot of money. So we chose to stay there, and we just stayed there the whole time.
Yeah, well, I'm asking because we were neighbors for 3 years, but we didn't know it.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing. On Port Island, I know that there were a lot of Jets who were married or married, and not all, but I know that there was like a lot of Jet couples I saw there. And there was also the Kobe University international school like residents or international students residence.
Yeah.
And then there was just some other people there. Like I know some people who worked at Riken, the research center, some different people. So there were often, foreigners floating around.
Yeah.
And there were some faces that I remember seeing for years and years. Yeah. And then other people that kind of seemed to come and go. Yeah.
I was at building 57, so I don't know.
I was building 52.
Yeah, we were probably a stone's throw away from each other. So,
yeah, we probably walked past each other, saw each other in the gourmet city, the Dai
or something,
or the Toho or something like that from time to time.
Yeah. I mean, there's like the supermarket in that area. That's where everybody goes. So I'm sure we crossed paths.
Yeah.
All right, so. Let's. I do want to go into the crazy story of this past year, but before since you're the first person that I guess is not Japanese that was in Kobe for a long time. So I want to just briefly discuss Kobe a little bit more with you. But
for sure,
for anybody that's going to Kobe or is not aware of Kobe, like what are some places that you might recommend for them to check out, or any places that you particularly like, for example?
Oh, sure thing. Kobe, there's a lot of things that I think personally are very cool about it. I mean, it's definitely you can't really compare it to somewhere like Kyoto or something like that. That's kind of apples and oranges. But just walking through downtown, the Motomachi area, there's an area called the Foreign Settlement, which is when Kobe was the second port to open up in Japan. Just after Yokohama, and most of the foreign community at the time in the 1800s had basically this one area where they had to live, and where they would build businesses and things. And there's a lot of this neat kind of 19th century European architecture. So a lot of cool buildings in that area. I personally love just hanging around in like American Park by the waterfront. It's just beautiful down there. Where else do I like to go? There's some great temples. I should say shrines in the area. There's a couple down by Kobe Station that are great. Ikuta Shrine in Sanomiya.
Yeah.
I love hiking, so I love going up like Mount Roko. So yeah, all those places are worth it. I mean, and one thing. It sounds like I'm a marketing and PR guy, but what I loved about Kobe was that like literally like if you hop on a bicycle, you could. You could be in the mountains or at the ocean within minutes.
Yep.
And that's pretty cool. I haven't lived in a place quite like that since then.
Yeah, it's a compact city, but there's so many nice places. It's really easy to get around. Like I remember some weekends, I've done this numerous times, but I would walk from Sannomiya, which is kind of like the main station, all the way over to Kobe Station, and just kind of explore the little side streets and just walk around that whole area. It's really fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of neat things to see, and I mean, my whole family would do that. We just even like this past year, which we'll talk about later. But I mean, we spent a lot of time we'd head to Kobe for the day and just walk around all day because it's that, like you said, it's so compact, right?
Yeah. And also like that they call it like the Ijinkan, which are those like foreign settlements that you were talking about. Like there's a lot of nice little cafes in that area, and like one thing I always remember is like there was this one cheesecake place. Every time I would walk by, it's like just this wonderful aroma.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such a hip little city too. Like that's my wife. My wife she's from Osaka, but she just loves Kobe so much more. It fits her personality. Like she's a maker. She makes clothing. She has like friends who do a lot of kind of artisanal food making in Kobe, and she likes that kind of there's a really cool organic farmers market now called Eat Local Kobe every weekend in Higashi Uenchi Park, and she loves that. So she just kind of loves the vibe in the city of Kobe much more than say in Osaka. Yeah,
and it's so close to Osaka too, so I would still see like my old friends from Osaka like all the time it's like if you take the express train, it's less than 30 minutes probably. So like 15-20 minutes for sure. Yeah. So I love Kobe. I haven't been back since I left in 2013, but I would certainly go back even if it is just to visit.
Oh, I totally refer to it as my second home. I don't think I feel more comfortable in Kobe than pretty much anywhere else in the world. Like when I get there, I do have a feeling of like, I'm home now. So I mean, long term, at some point, I'd love to live there again.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the bigger question of how did the decision to leave Japan come? Because of course, like you said, you were living there for a long time. You were teaching. You've made it your career as a teacher. I know you're very serious about that, and you're really enthusiastic about it. And everything that I see that you do, whether it's that other podcast that you were doing about teaching or your social media stuff, it really seems like you love teaching. So, what happened? Where was the shift that you said, let me try going to China?
Okay. Long story. I'll try to condense it. Well, I worked in Japan as an international school teacher. So what is an international school? I mean, there's that's a broad definition. There are schools in Japan that will call themselves an international school literally because they have a foreign teacher. They might not have any kind of curriculum. They'll have no accreditations or anything like that, but they're like, we're an international school. Other international schools you find might have only local kids. Like, for example, in Japan, there might be only Japanese students. And then when you move to kind of bigger schools elsewhere, kind of air quotes, true international schools, normally the students aren't allowed to have a passport from that country. So they literally do have to be foreign children to attend. I was working at a school that grew a lot. It was started small and it grew. It became an international baccalaureate, an IB World School. So they got that really important accreditation, which then really made their numbers grow and grow. And the school got bigger and bigger. And, I did more, professional development. I got to go to workshops and conferences and meet teachers from other parts of Asia. And a few things I quickly learned when you talk to these teachers, maybe afterwards at a social over a beer or something, they were making a heck of a lot more money than I was, and they had way better working conditions. And I kind of learned about the world of international teaching and their international higher packages. So a lot of schools will give, big international schools will give teachers a package, which includes a very good salary, free tuition for their own children, which I have too, so their kids can attend the school. There may be free housing, free airfare every year. They fly you back to your native country for summer holidays, all these great, amazing things. And I didn't have any of that stuff. I made, just like any other person, if I was working in Canada as a teacher, I had a salary. But, we decided as a family some of my colleagues started, deciding to leave and move on. And a lot of my colleagues started getting jobs at fantastic schools in other parts of Asia, in Korea and in China. And they'd say like, we're getting paid this much now, and this is our package. And my wife and I are just like, holy moly, that's insane.
Yeah.
And I realized I was as qualified as they were. I had the teaching certifications, I had the professional workshops under my belt. And so we decided that we wanted to get into that kind of world. So we made the jump, and because I was what they call a local hire in Japan, and a local hire, if it would be basically, and it's kind of sad, but this is the way it works. If there's a big international school in Japan, and you say now, Tony, you're in the States right now, right? And now maybe for example, I'm in Japan on the ground. We may be as qualified. The school hires both of us. You are going to get a salary, a really nice salary. You are going to get free tuition for your kids. You will get free housing. You will get airfare paid for. I'm not going to get any of that stuff. I'm going to get a salary and possibly free tuition for my kids, but that's it, because I'm a local hire. So we wanted to get out of that world. So we decided to move to Beijing. Schools in China, there's a lot of big international schools, and they have to really sweeten the pot, because living in China is not always the easiest place to be. Internet isn't reliable. You have to use VPNs to access things. You have to be careful what you say on social media. It's better to not say. It's better to not say anything usually. With regards to where you live, aside from like hey, look at the food I ate today.
Yeah.
So, to make those sacrifices, schools realize that they have to, really entice people. So my family and I, my wife and my two kids moved to Beijing in 2017. And I worked at a large international school in Beijing. But Beijing, I did not like Beijing. The people I worked with were fantastic. The school was great, but the air pollution was insane. Yeah. And I know we knew that. We weren't dumb. We knew that.
Sure, yeah.
We had air purifiers in our house, in our apartment, in every room, and we wore a type of like air pollution masks called VOG masks, and we took care of all that stuff. But at the end of the day,
it's not easy,
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. There's a lot of days when like my kids on a weekend, they're like, Dad, we want to go out and play. I'm like, you can't today, guys. The AQI is over 200. You're not going outside.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of recesses, where I teach like early elementary school, like grade 2, grade 1, kindergarten, where kids can't go outside for like a couple of weeks at a time because the air pollution's so bad.
Right.
So because of that was motivation, and after a couple of years there, I came down here to Shenzhen, where I live now, and a lot of people don't know where Shenzhen is. A lot of people have no idea. I'm basically right across Hong Kong Bay. Or Shenzhen Bay is so you can cross over to Hong Kong territory via bridge from Shenzhen. So I'm on the mainland side of China, and Shenzhen is a really booming city, very modern, very, very nice. And I got a job down here at probably the most what's the term, established school in the city. The oldest school in the city, the most established, and it's fantastic school. I absolutely love working here. And the air pollution last year was a lot less. Last year was gorgeous, but now we're dealing with a bit of pollution now because there's a lot of construction, and that's why. There's construction all over the city, so there's just dust everywhere. But yeah, so now I'm here in Shenzhen, and kind of even climbed up the ladder even more professionally. Than my job in Beijing. So is it a lot of international teachers? It's like you're constantly, hopping from rock to rock, getting more experience, and moving up to better schools, bigger schools, and So now here we are in Shenzhen, and in many ways it reminds me of Kobe. We live right by the water, Shenzhen Bay. I've got a mountain right behind my apartment building. I'm sitting in my classroom right now, and my classroom, our campus is on the side of a mountain.
Wow!
And we can see the ocean, so it's kind of cool. Yeah, it is. It's very nice. So I'm quite happy. But that's, long story short, that's why we're here.
Right.
That's why we left, and it was financially and career-wise, professionally, a really good decision on my part to make the move to China.
Right. There's. Of course, there's always exceptions. Every situation is different. But would you say that compared to, your sort of job situation in general, not you specifically, but like foreigners teaching English in Japan, does it seem like currently it's more competitive to seek opportunities in Asia outside of Japan at the moment?
You know what? I think, it's competitive all over the place, and that's like, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure post-pandemic it will.
Yeah.
Obviously, things have been put on hold. I think it's a lot more competitive. It's growing in China, and China are really, they're trying to get foreigners to come here. They're trying to get that talent. So, as with regards to English teaching, I think the salaries here in China are probably more now than what teachers in Japan are making.
Right.
Maybe comparable to those in Korea. But every year the salaries in China are going up and up and up. Japan has that thing, and I've heard this on other podcasts, and I've talked about it too. They've got this intangible quality that Japan is Japan, and people just want to be in Japan, and people are willing to work at a crap job as long as they get to be in Japan and experience Japan.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing that I've heard this argument before, that employers know that, and that's why salaries, have remained locked for time and eternity. With regards to teaching, like ESL, even with regards to international scene, it's competitive, as in there are a lot of experienced teachers who would love the opportunity to live in Japan. But I've heard too many of colleagues and people I meet in this little kind of world I live in of international teachers who will just say, they'll be just like, oh, I want to live in Japan, but I interviewed at this school and the packages, like the pay is just not good compared to working in the Middle East or working in China, which is true. Even the big schools don't offer the same kind of package, but at the end of the day, where are you going to be more happy? And that's a discussion. That's a new thing that I talk about, because I plan on pivoting back to Japan, absolutely, in a few years. And I know that I'll make less money than I make now, but at that point, I'll just be happy to be where I am. Like, the quality of life will be just a lot better, and so we'll see where that takes me in a few years. But so it's again, Japan. It's a very competitive market. I think it's way more competitive because so many people want to go to Japan.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, for example, the JET program, like, that is, I think it's safe to say that's the most competitive way to get to Japan to teach English. And yet it's also the one that is most famous for sending people to the most rural places in Japan. So, true, right? I think that speaks to what you're saying, where, I don't care where you send me, just as long as I get to live in Japan, I'll do whatever, There's that feeling there for a lot of people.
Yeah, and a lot of people have that feeling where they've just, they're envisioning themselves living in Tokyo or Osaka or something like that, at least Fukuoka or Kobe, and they end up in a little village in rural Japan where they have to teach at schools that have like less than 50 kids in them or something like that.
Or like 5 kids,
Yeah, I've heard those tales, right?
Yeah. I was very much... Sorry, I was very much the exception in that Kobe has a big JET program, but most big cities do not have a very big like English teacher hired directly by the city kind of program. So.
Yeah, that's right. So the Kobe JET scene is kind of a unique thing, right?
Yeah. I think there's usually like 100 or more, it seems, at least in the past 10 years or so. So. Yeah.
Well, but at the same time, though, those rural jets, when you meet most of those people, man, they've got dang good Japanese.
Yeah. And some really interesting stories, and you're able to build some really nice relationships. I think it's easier if you make the effort in the rural areas as opposed to, on average, right, in the big cities where people are a bit more jaded and busy and,
Yeah, or just, you're just another foreign face in the crowd, to be honest, and I think... I don't even think it's so much a matter of like just cities or I want to say cold, but like cities are like that everywhere in the world,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm from a small village, like in rural Canada. I grew up in a little town of less than 1,000 people, and everyone knows everyone, right? You do, and for good and for bad. But there's definitely a type of community that you couldn't have anywhere else. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into what happened in 2020. So I follow your Twitter. I've been keeping an eye on you because you've been having a crazy 2020.
Oh, yeah.
You post little videos here and there, like updating people on what has been going on. So I thought I want to talk to Kevin about this because this is such a
Sure.
unique experience. But so
Yeah.
you're in Shenzhen, and then
Yep.
2020 happens, and of course
Yep.
we all know what happened 2020, coronavirus, blah blah blah. You end up going back to Japan, but when did that happen? What was that decision process like? Was that like you made that decision, or you had no choice? Like, how did that come about?
Oh, I made that decision. So let's see. Backtrack
Yeah.
to January of 2020, and here we are working, and life is just normal. It's mid-January, and the biggest holiday of the year happens in China, the Chinese New Year, and we had a two-week holiday for that. That was fantastic because I just finished like 3 weeks winter holiday,
Yeah.
and then it's like I'm at school for a week and a half, and then I got 2 more weeks. I'm like, hey, this is great. So during the holiday, we started hearing some strange rumblings about this sickness going on up in Wuhan, which is about halfway between Shenzhen and Beijing. And word is going around that something's going on. You were seeing it in Western media, this or that. Rumblings that something was going to happen. We're starting to see things happen around us, literally. Like all of a sudden, you had to wear masks to go somewhere. Hand sanitizer was popping up in all the supermarkets, and they had people making sure you put on hand sanitizer before you went shopping. And partway through that, I think the last week of the Chinese New Year, we learned that our school would not be reopening in February, and that we would have to go into online learning. And we all said, what the heck is that? So we had no time to prep. None of us were at school. A lot of our teachers took that Chinese New Year to travel. We traditionally, my family, we've only been in China for a few years. We choose never to travel at Chinese New Year because that's when everyone else does.
Yeah. Because it's like golden week in Japan, where it's
exactly.
like too crazy to even bother.
Exactly, right? Just have a staycation.
Yeah.
So we're having our staycation. I'd say more than 50% of our colleagues are traveling. They're in places like Thailand, a lot in Thailand, just traveling, having their vacation, right? Hanging at the beach. We find out that we're going to be going to online learning, so none of us can actually have any kind of physical meeting. So we're starting to have all of our meetings together on. We learned about something called Zoom. We get on this, and we're having our team meetings, and we're trying to figure out like how the heck are we going to do this. So we start doing this online learning thing, and it's a mess. It's like a dumpster fire, and that's the term you hear a lot. But we're feeling in the dark. The teachers in China, we were the first ones in the world to do online, like to move all to online.
Right.
Things were kind of ratcheting up with restrictions here in Shenzhen because of COVID, and we were kind of starting to feel uncomfortable. But my wife and I figured we're going to hunker down. We're just going to get through this. So February comes along, first week, second week of February, it's getting scary for us here. We all live in compounds, and that's the way it works here in the city. All people who live in apartment buildings, it's like an apartment compound. So you're going to have fences around it, security guards. Well, it got to the point where all the restaurants in the city closed. Not even takeout, just everything closed.
Wow.
We couldn't order things online like we used to. You used to order like groceries and stuff. That all stopped. Then they started locking down the compounds. So friends couldn't visit us, we couldn't visit friends. My kids couldn't go play with their friends. Their friends couldn't come over to our place to play.
Right.
It gets to the point where only one person is allowed to leave during the day to go to the supermarket.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, and if you left more than once, you'd get shit from the guards, wondering why you're leaving. So just before that, we did try to have to meet our kids, meet their friends. There was a few playgrounds down by the waterfront, and we'd meet there. But then the police would come and tell us to go away, like we couldn't gather. It just, I remember this one moment where, we ended up having to get these, what do they call them?
Contact tracing app things?
Contact tracing app. Contact tracing apps.
Yeah.
And here, you have no choice. It's not like in America or Canada where they're like, we want you to volunteer. We ask you to please use this contact tracing app. You do not have a choice. And that's one thing that a lot of people in other places don't understand. This is a country where they have the authority, I'll just say, to make things happen fast. And you can't argue anything. Like, it just happens, which is also part of the reason why things were contained the way they were with the speed. But yeah, we got nervous, and then a lot of our friends who said they were going to stick it out too, they left. They went back home to the States or Canada, and the numbers of us, our colleagues, were just like dropping. And then we just decided, you know what, let's just go back to Japan. You know, the kids' grandparents live there. We've got friends, we got family. So we decided to leave, and we got tickets. We each brought a suitcase, and we flew into Osaka on February 17th. And things were pretty tame there. It was like, wow, we're back in Osaka. It's cold, but here we are. And we got a room at an Airbnb. And
so you didn't have to quarantine, or what was that like?
No,
that was before they started doing much of anything, huh?
Oh, we didn't have to do anything.
Wow.
You just walked off that airplane. Yep, nothing.
Huh.
No pieces of paper to be filled out. Yeah. And I mean, for a long time, it didn't change much from that.
Yeah.
You know,
I know. Japan took a while to really.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So we get in, and we decided to isolate for 2 weeks. Yeah. We made that choice. I mean, isolate as much as we could. We didn't meet people. We didn't meet friends. We didn't meet my in-laws. We didn't meet anybody. We would just stay at home basically all day long and pop out to the supermarket with our masks on.
Yeah.
So we self-isolated. We just did this all on our own. You know, kind of trying to train us for that. Took our temperatures several times a day. And at the end of a few weeks, we were all fine, the four of us. So then we're like, okay, now we can go see our friends and our family. And so there we were. I'm teaching online in a one-room apartment. My two kids are there trying to do online learning themselves in a one-room apartment. And the reason why we had a one-room apartment is because, Airbnbs and stuff in Osaka are crazy expensive. We were paying like $1,300 a month for a one room.
Yeah.
And so we're waiting for things to cool down.
But just for anybody that's not aware, a one room is literally a one room. Or are you talking about a one bedroom?
Yeah. No, one room.
Okay, yeah. In Japanese, there's the one room, right? And that just means like one rectangle.
It's a rectangle that has a kitchen and some beds in it.
Yeah.
And then there's a separate bathroom.
Yeah.
So the rumblings were coming through that China was going to close its borders. And at that point, there were 5 countries on China's red list. And one was Japan. And it was recommended to us that what we do is we fly to a third country, spend 14 days, and then come into China. If we came in from Japan, we would have to quarantine for a couple of weeks. And at that time, the quarantine stories were very scary because China was very new at it. People were being put in really low-end hotels, really bad conditions, treated horribly, like very scary stuff. So we decided we were going to fly to Malaysia and spend 2 weeks in Malaysia and then fly into Shenzhen. We had some friends in Malaysia who were diplomats. We knew them from our days in Beijing, which is another very cool thing about the international teaching world.
True, yeah.
And they were going to help us out a lot. And we're just about to fly to Malaysia 2 days before, and we bought our tickets. We had our Airbnb booked. 2 days before we flew, Malaysia closed its borders to all foreigners.
Jeez.
So there we go. Then the Airbnb wouldn't give us a refund. And in the end, we ended up losing all of the money from those plane tickets because the airline went out of business.
Whoa.
Yeah, Air Asia Japan.
Oh, they're like they're an LCC, right? A low cost carrier.
Yeah.
But no more, huh?
No more.
Yeah.
So those borders closed. So then they're like, what do we do? And then next thing you know, China closed its border to everybody, all foreigners. And there we were, just stuck in limbo for the next, it was 9 months in total.
Yeah.
We ended up bouncing around. We moved 6 different times.
Whoa.
Because what would happen a lot, Japan closed its borders, right?
Yeah.
So there were no foreigners coming into Japan, which meant there were no tourists. So all of the tourist industry had been booming leading up into the pandemic. So there were just Airbnbs everywhere. And we were often using a company called booking.com. So it's similar to Airbnb, but we found we got better prices and there was more selection. So what happened is a lot of the people who owned Airbnbs and different rental places weren't making any money because all their apartments were empty because there were no tourists. So a lot of them started shutting down their businesses and delisting themselves as Airbnb and just becoming regular apartments. So what was happening is we could only rent a place for a month at a time. And there was a few places we could renew it for an extra month. Yeah. But often we'd go to renew a place for the next month and it was unlisted. It was delisted. It was gone.
Wow.
So we'd have to move on to a new place. And, this went on. And we stayed in the same area of Osaka But yeah, so I finished up the school year in June with my online learning, and I had my summer holiday, and my kids were really suffering from not being around other children because they were literally all day, every day, just with mom and dad studying. And my son's at the time 9, and my daughter was 6. And it just sucked. They had no one to play with, and that really takes an effect on kids when they have no one to play with. So they decided, they begged us. They're like, Dad, Mom, Dad, could you please put us in Japanese public school? So we enrolled them. So in order to do this, we had to become residents of Osaka. So,
jeez.
We had to go through so much paperwork, and we had to start paying. We had to start paying taxes in Osaka. We got Kenkomin Hoken, so we got the health care for the family. And we had to have all this stuff in order to register at a local elementary school. Whereas in Kobe, when we had our kids go to school there a couple of years back, they're just like, come on in. We're just thinking, we're at a hotel for a couple of weeks. Like every school board is different. We're in a hotel for a couple of weeks, and our kids just went to school in Kobe for 2 weeks just for the experience. But we enrolled them in a local elementary school, and they were there for 2 months, and it was, my son loved it. He had been an ichinensei in Japan. My daughter didn't Japanese education style did not fit her too well. She is a sparky, spunky little native English speaking girl who goes to really forward, progressive international schools, who has things called like flexible seating, and kids are allowed to move around the room and eat snacks when they're hungry. They can just go and grab some food and eat food while they're studying. And then she was in an Osaka elementary school. Oh boy.
Quite an experience.
That was great. It was hilarious talking to her homeroom teacher. He was like, she keeps getting up and walking around. You can't do that. I'm like, oh yeah, we know. We'd have to talk to her like, you can't do that. You can't. Even like little things like we see pictures on the school's website. They'd post photos of what was going on in the school, and you'd see her class, and every kid is sitting oyamazori, the little mountain sitting, and she's sitting crisscross applesauce, legs crisscross, and my wife's like, oh, that looks so bad. That's like bad manners in Japan. I'm like, well, she doesn't know Japanese manners,
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was a really interesting experience. My son had a homeroom teacher who used a lot of bad language.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, he would just call kids idiots and morons and all kinds of stuff. It was impressive. And so at the end of it, Kai was like, jokingly, he'd be like, you know what, Dad, one good thing about this time in Japan, at school, he's like, I learned a lot of bad words I didn't know before. Right? Because he's only using Japanese with his mother, right? So
exactly. Yeah, you only learn a certain kind of vocabulary.
Yeah. They finish up. They go back into online learning, and then in order to get back into China was starting to let foreigners back in, but you had to have something called a PU letter. And
was
no one knows
in the summer? Or when
this process started. Yeah, they started letting people in late August. And you had to have a special endorsement letter from your employer. And once you had the endorsement letter, you could reapply for a new visa.
Yeah.
So we just had to wait and wait and wait and wait for that letter to come through. And finally, no one knows why it's called a PU letter. It's like a mystery.
PU, yeah. Like you think, bad smell, but...
Yeah, but the letters P and U, and no one knows what it stands for. Still to this day, it's a mystery. But we finally got our letter in... the end of September, we got our letter, and there was much cheering and happiness. We wanted to get back to just normalcy. Like we've got a beautiful, beautiful apartment in Shenzhen, nicest apartment we've ever lived in our lives. The kids had all their toys there, their friends, and the kids. My son has a massive Lego collection. He loves Batman. He's got all the Batman Lego, and he's just like, Dad, I miss my Lego. We go through the process, which was quite painful, of getting a new visa. Just because of the restrictions. The Chinese Visa Center was only open 2 afternoons a week, and you had to make an appointment online. And the first time we did it, we get in there, and there was a document that I didn't have that I was told I didn't need it, but when I got there, they're like, yeah, you need it. And it was like, okay, great. And they're like, yeah, you have to make another appointment online. And then I couldn't make another appointment for 3 weeks until 3 weeks after, like 3 weeks later. I was just like, oh. And then finally things started moving. and we were hearing all the stories. A lot of our colleagues had gone before us, had done the hotel quarantines and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we were preparing for it. We prepared for worst case scenario that they would split us up, one child, one parent per room. And my wife did so much amazing research on it. She researched that, like other Japanese people who had gone before us, like bring cleaning supplies, bring a toilet brush, bring a toilet plunger, bring like all these things. We even bought these special bags for doing laundry, for washing clothes and with detergent in the sink. And my daughter has an anaphylactic peanut allergy, which causes a lot of problems here in China because they use peanuts in almost everything, and peanut oil. So we basically always have to, she can't eat Chinese food, essentially.
Oh.
So we started doing the research, and we stocked up on weeks worth of like freeze-dried camping food from places like Mont Bell and different places. A lot of the stuff is just awesome stuff. It's like good food. So we basically, for each team, we call them teams. Our two teams, again, worst case scenario, we had enough food for our children for 2 weeks, and my wife and I are just like, we'll eat the food that's supplied to us.
Right.
We fly into Shenzhen. It was a pretty freaky experience. There was a direct flight from Narita in Tokyo to Shenzhen. A lot of people were wearing full PPE on the airplane, just like people, like the customers. We wore N95 masks and face shields when we flew. We get to Shenzhen. It's a very well-oiled machine at this point, how they deal with everyone. As soon as we get off the bus, as soon as we get off the plane, they sit us all in this terminal, and then they give us all PCR tests. We had a nasal swab and throat swab. And then they literally herd you on a bus. And you get on that bus, and it just takes you somewhere, and you don't know where you're going. It takes you to a quarantine hotel somewhere in the city, and they bring us to the quarantine hotel, and we had to fight. They weren't going to let us take our food with us. They were going to and then we luckily came super prepared. It's a great thing about having a Japanese wife. She thinks very well about everything. So we had letters from Kobe Kodomo Byoan, the children's hospital, all about my daughter's peanut allergy and how she can't. And we had those translated into Chinese. So we brought that. We showed the doctor at each quarantine hotel has a doctor. We showed them, and they're like, okay, you can take all your food. You can have everything.
Wow. Huh.
So I spent 2 weeks with and it was worst case scenario. They separated us. I spent 2 weeks in a room with my daughter, and my son was with my wife, and across the hallway. But we would, we lived 2 weeks, and it actually wasn't too bad. It was a tiny room. It was like a shoebox, and the TV didn't work. But we had devices, and we had my laptop, and we had VPNs, so we had our Netflix and all that stuff.
Right.
Disney Unlimited or Disney Plus, whatever the heck it is. I paid $10 a month for. So we had these things, and the kids were doing their online learning, and I was spending all this time prepping food for my daughter. And we did our 2 weeks, and we got out, and let's see, and then so here we are, 7 PCR tests later. I've had 7 COVID tests at this point. And we're kind of back to normal life. I mean, I'm talking to you now at the beginning of January. We're seeing some restrictions maybe coming back down the line.
Right.
I know up in Beijing, a lot of schools have started this new term online. We are starting with on-the-ground teaching as of Monday, but I'm not sure what the next month or two are going to look like for us. But I know one thing, we're not leaving.
Yeah.
Because we're staying put.
Yeah. Man, it's such a crazy year, huh? I mean, we all say, "Oh, what a crazy year it was," but I think if you say that, it has way more weight to it than when I say it, for example.
But the thing is that like we've got colleagues who had much crazier years. We were fortunate enough to be, at least we were stuck in a country that it was one of our countries, my wife and I.
Yeah.
That's true. We had a lot of colleagues who got stuck in a third country. We had a big contingent in Thailand, and they don't have any connection to Thailand. They don't speak Thai. They just happen to be there on holiday.
Wow.
And they decided to ride it out, kind of like we did, and then the borders closed.
It'll be a couple months or whatever.
yeah, exactly. It'll be 6 weeks. We'll be back. So a lot of our colleagues were stuck there, and
that's tough.
I mean, yeah, there are nice places and all, but like the uncertainty,
Yeah.
that's it's always weighing on you. So at least like we were in Japan. You know, my wife's from there. We stayed in a neighborhood, even though we moved around to different Airbnbs. We could always walk to the kids' grandparents' house.
Right.
And I lived there long enough that I've got some good lifelong friends.
Yeah.
Who will be in Japan forever, you know, own homes and stuff like that. And I got to hang out with them a lot. So we had a support network. So that was, you know, silver linings, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's the way to look at it. My kids got to go to school. We got to celebrate Shichigo-san with my daughter. She wore a kimono, went to a shrine. You know, my daughter got to experience what Japanese elementary school is like. She didn't like it, but she'll always have that story, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, 2020 definitely sucked. But at least to health-wise, you know, none of us caught COVID.
Exactly.
And we're all healthy now and back to where we wanted to be. And then now we'll just maybe hunker down again and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm glad you're okay. You made it through, and at least now we have a better idea of how this whole thing works and spreads and all that. So there's better strategies in place, so you won't have to do something like you did last year. So,
Well, I mean, and two at that point, right? Like it was just such an unknown. I started making YouTube videos on a regular basis during the early days here in China, and I got nothing. I mean, they got big views, and I got so much like hate from people in America who were like, look at you wearing a mask. Masks don't do anything. Or look at you doing this and that. And then it's kind of like later on, it's like, well.
Yep.
I wonder, all those people who left like really hateful comments, I wonder what's happened to their families or their experiences now since then, right?
Yeah, that's the internet, sadly. You know, you can say anything before you have to like back it up.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that a lot of the people who maybe tried to troll me in those YouTube comments have probably had a much rougher time of life than I have post that, right? Wherever they live in the world. Yeah.
It's sad. And you're definitely a senpai to me in this regard, in that you've been podcasting and blogging for longer than I have. So I'm sure you've run into stuff like that every once in a while.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I've got an entire episode of the old Just Japan podcast where I explain how a guy in Kobe tried to get me fired from my job because he didn't like a YouTube video I made. Jeez. So he tracked down my employer and wrote all these letters and stuff.
I think I remember this actually. Yeah.
I mean, nothing happened because I had a good relationship with my employer, and they looked through. They were like, "We have no idea what this guy's talking about. He's crazy." But he was a bucket of crazy. And but you know, like some people, you know, and I think if you podcast for a long time and stuff, you just, you know, blog even, you just have to have a thick skin.
Definitely, yeah.
And just, you know, but whatever. It's I avoid anything controversial now. I don't want any of that stuff. I just, you know, let's just make happy content.
Yeah, exactly.
Happy content.
And even if something happens, it's like, why engage? Just, you know, do your thing, enjoy what you're doing, because they're just there to
block.
Yeah, they're just there to spoil. So yeah.
Well, exactly.
Last area that I wanted to ask you about as we wrap up, but I know you started a new podcast recently. What number podcast is this for you?
Gosh, to be honest, this is my fourth podcast.
Yeah. My
first podcast I started was in 2008. And that was at a point when there were really no hosting services around.
Yeah.
So I had what did I use? Foursquare. Was that it? Foursquare. Yeah, that's a website building thing.
Squarespace.
Squarespace, that's it.
Yeah. Foursquare was like a social media thing, I think.
Geez, that's right. I think it was about like, that's it. No, I didn't use that one. Yeah, Squarespace. I had a Squarespace blog because I could upload MP3s to it and people could download them.
Okay.
And I could link it into iTunes. So I had a podcast called Looks Like Canada, and it was a Canadian history podcast.
Oh, really? I didn't listen to that one.
I did like 10 episodes of it, and then it was just me alone. Like I'd research something, write up a script, and like read it, but I was just like, oh, this is so boring.
Yeah,
it's just me.
It's tough,
I didn't interview people, and it was just so that's why it was just literally me talking. So that ended, and then I decided at one point, there was really no content out there about Japan in the podcast space. There'd be some podcasts that would come and go. there'd be some podcasts where maybe a couple of Jets would make one about the Jet program.
Right.
And it was like super inside baseball talk. And I had no idea what they were talking about because I wasn't an ALT. And I'd get quickly bored. And then usually the podcast would last a year or so while the teachers were here and then they'd leave. Yeah. So I started the Just Japan podcast, and the idea was to just bring on a different guest each week and talk about their life in Japan. And I did more than 200 episodes.
Yeah, I think you're at 201 last time.
I think 201.
Yeah,
201. But then I left Japan, and to be honest, for me, and I don't know, the spark just kind of went. I mean, I love Japan and all, but just podcasting about it, and I think I started getting so wrapped up in my professional career as being a teacher. And focusing on improving as a teacher, that's kind of what I wanted to get into. So then I stopped the Just Japan podcast and I started one called the Making Better Teachers podcast. And that was more like I would say free professional development, free PD. And I'd bring on kind of like the who's who of teachers around the world to talk about different topics. But that eventually kind of got old for me too, because it felt like I was always working.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's true.
Because it was we're talking about the stuff that my colleagues and I talk about every day at work. And it just kind of, and I was really heavy into Twitter education, the education scene on Twitter at that point. I really made a shift to ed stuff. And it was just like, man, I'm always working, always thinking about teaching, education, which is good when you're a teacher, but you got to compartmentalize things, right? You got to enjoy life and do other things.
Sure.
So while I was in Japan, a friend of mine, I'm a geocacher, was a geocacher, a friend of mine who was a geocacher. And if people out there don't know what geocaching is, it's a location-based game where you run around the world looking for real life kind of hidden articles, like little treasures kind of things. And you use an app and maps and you clues and you solve puzzles and you find these objects and so it's a game. But he introduced me to a similar game called Munzee, which I'd never heard of before, and I'm sure most of your listeners have never heard of it either.
Yeah, I learned about it through your Twitter, so.
Yeah, it's just absolutely fun location-based game where you stick QR codes onto things, and people run around with an app trying to find QR codes, and they scan them to get points, and there's a lot of layers to it, and there's games within the game, but it's basically a game where I get to be outside all the time, running around, whether on a bicycle or walking or on my e-bike, finding little hidden things. And it's kind of clandestine, so you're trying to hide things. You don't want people to see you doing it. So it's fun. I know, there's several thousand people around the world play the game, and my friends and I got really into it. And I decided, I'm going to make a podcast that I know will never make me famous. I will never make any money from. Something that's going to be very niche. But it was a space where there hasn't been any podcast since like 2017.
Right.
But I know there's a big community. So my friend and I decided to have a co-host, and my friend PJ, who was a regular on the Just Japan podcast. We decided to create something called the Munzee Maniacs Podcast, and it comes out once every 2 weeks, and we talk about the game of Munzee. We bring on different players from around the world, and I know that the little community we're in, they're so grateful and happy that they now have content to listen to.
Oh, that's great.
So it's very niche. But at the same time, what I realized was, in the past, I've had podcasts where I daydreamed of maybe potentially becoming like a full-time podcaster.
Sure, yeah.
Or that was the dream. So I was always thinking really big and thinking about all these next steps. Whereas now I'm just like, you know what? I've got a dorky little podcast about a little dorky hobby, and I'm just having fun doing it. And we've got a supportive little community who really loves the content, and it's a great way to not think about all the bad stuff that's happening in the world around us.
No, I listened to the latest episode that you put out. I think it was at the end of December, and it seems like a really nice release. You guys are walking outside, exploring the city, having a good time, and talking about it. So, yeah,
that's exactly what it's all about, and it's fun now. We just interviewed a guy from Portsmouth, England, a couple of days ago, and he was talking about his experiences playing in the UK, and it was just like, oh, that was cool. So that's what I'm doing now, and that's kind of it. I'm not as busy on Twitter as I used to be. I'm still there, but I've moved away from just like tweeting education stuff. And I've gotten when I was in Japan, I got more into like macro photography. I'm also into entomology and birds. I'm a bird
I see
and
a
bug
lot
guy.
of nature stuff and insects, and it's just nice, happy content.
That's a big, that's a big thing with me too. I'm an outdoor educator, so I'm always like trying to teach people, not just kids, but like adults, about conservation, about biodiversity. So I'm also really into photography. So, I loved sharing. I think the best part about Twitter while I was away was sharing night photography in Osaka.
Oh, yeah.
I love going out at night and taking photos. And then, pictures of birds and bugs and stuff. So now that's kind of where I'm at. And I find that I'm much happier in the Twitter space as well, because I'm just I'm posting positive stuff.
Exactly. And people can't argue with pictures of birds and insects. I mean, what are they going to say, right?
That bumblebee's not fuzzy enough.
Exactly.
You suck.
Okay, so what is your Twitter handle that we've kept mentioning multiple times?
Okay, on Twitter I am at Mad4Maple. Mad for Maple. I don't know why. I'm a Canadian who loves his maple syrup. Let's go with the stereotypes. And if anyone wants to hear that, if they're curious to learn about what the heck is Munzee, you go to you just do a Google search, type in Munzee Maniacs Podcast, and it'll pop up. We're on we're on Google Play, we're on Spotify, Anchor,
right.
Apple Podcasts, all those places. And listen to episode 1, and we'll explain what it is.
That's Munzee, right?
Yes, that's right. Munzee Maniacs Podcast. It's a weird word. My son asked me, he's like, what does that word mean? I mean, it doesn't mean anything. They made it up. The people who made the game.
It was what they could get the domain name for. Or whatever.
It means the same thing as Schnargleflarf, It's just, they pulled it out of somewhere.
Yeah, and it was catchy, so they were like, let's go with this. Yeah,
exactly.
Perfect. All right. Cool. Any other place people should check out, or are those the two main places right now?
If you want to check out that wildlife photography, and I really got to start taking care of this Instagram more, because I've got so many photos and I haven't been putting them up. But if you're on Instagram, check out Shizen Wildlife. So Shizen, Shizen, that's the Japanese word for nature. So Shizen Wildlife, that's me on Instagram, and awesome. That's really about it.
All right, awesome. So I will, of course, include the links there. But Kevin, thank you so much for making time and telling me your crazy story.
No problem. Thank you for having me on. It is a crazy story, and that's one thing I'm hoping that we'll get off the ground in the future. I've got a coworker who's planning on starting a podcast where he just interviews all of our colleagues about their crazy stories during the COVID times.
That sounds fascinating.
So I'm hoping he'll get that off the ground, because man, there's some just crazy stories my colleagues have experienced. So. So I'll let you know if that happens.
I'll keep an eye out on your Twitter, of course, too.
That's not my podcast. It's a colleague. So, but if it does come out, I'll be definitely, throwing it out there on my Twitter and stuff like that.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Once again, thank you so much, Kevin. I really, really appreciate you making time between your family and Munzee Maniacs and work and all that stuff. I know you're super busy, but thank you for taking time to go to your school to get the better internet connection and then talking to me from there. So again, all the links in the show notes. Kevin has been putting out content for years now, so there's so much you can look into. But of course, his most recent project is Munzee Maniacs, and I think Munzee sounds pretty interesting. So it really seems like a great way to exercise and get out into the world, as well as just kind of distract yourself a little bit from the more serious things going on in the world. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, go check out Munzee, and then maybe go listen to Kevin talk about Munzee. Anyway, if you have any questions or comments, send me an email to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Follow on Facebook and Twitter @Japankyo News. There's been quite a few new Twitter followers lately, so thank you so much, guys, for following. And if you haven't done so yet, then go check it out. And of course, remember to subscribe. That is the number one free thing you can do to support the show. Leave a rating, review, tell a friend. I would greatly appreciate all that stuff. And thank you to Unomi for providing the opening, closing song, Oeda Controller, information in the show notes. That does it for this episode. The next episode should be out on February 15th, and that one is going to be about censorship and obscenity in Japan. It's a very interesting topic. I already got to do the interview, and I won't say who the guest is, but he is a returning guest. So I don't know, maybe you can figure it out. Again, that's going to be out on February 15th. All right. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!